it is a great pleasure for us as we come out with the first preliminary findings of round 4. Of course, the fact is that this is the first cut, and we look forward to deeper analysis as we go forward. So this is really descriptive analysis that we are providing to you. So it's going to be a little tough because I'm sure there are lots of questions regarding causality that will come up, but don't know whether we are in a position to answer those. So that's the caveat as we move on. But it's very exciting times. The older cohort have turned 19, and we have babies of the older cohort. So that's where we are, where we have the next generation with us, and our younger cohort have turned 12. So as we share some of these findings, that's where we are, positive, where the older cohort are parents, some of them, moving into looking for jobs, some in higher education, whereas the younger cohort are 12, and we can compare them with the older cohort who were 12 in 2006. So that's the whole wealth of young lives, which allows you this cross-cohort comparison. And we're just going to give you a glimpse of some of the findings from India. So my colleague, Professor Joe Boyden, just mentioned already how important stunting is, and I know I don't have to reiterate the fact that undernutrition definitely undermines not just children's learning levels, but their whole trajectories and life opportunities as they move forward. And we have been collecting anthropometric measures since 2002. So if you look at the figures here, you look at the total of percentage of children who are stunted in 2006, which is in the blue, which is about 34.4%, 34%, and 29% now in 2013. So despite the huge growth story that we have, yes, there has been slight improvement in stunting levels, but nothing really as far as the bottom tercile is concerned. So no improvement. And I think that's what Young Lives brings forward, that what is happening to the poorest children despite this growth story. So obviously something is not quite right. Something is not reaching that poorest child in spite of all the policy measures that are currently underway. And we need to really think more seriously about this whole aspect. The fact sheets will give you more data regarding, for example, food diversity. Young Lives does look at children's consumption in the last 24 hours. And we have Dr. Meera Shiva, who's on our National Advisory Board. And you will agree, Meera, that what happens here is that the types of cereals that children are, for example, what we found in this round is that children are taking different sorts of cereals than they were in the last rounds. And definitely we know that, and other research studies are talking about the lack of bajra and millet, as PDS is only, ma'am, today giving wheat and rice through the public distribution system. So how do we look at more diverse food varieties coming into the PDS would be something we really need to look forward to. And of course, we know a whole lot of other co-determinants of undernutrition. And yes, the good news is that yes, there has been a huge increase to improved water. Please note, we're not calling it safe drinking water, we're just saying improved water. But yes, there has been an improvement, and this is, from 84% in 2002, which has gone up to 99% for the younger cohort in 2013. But look what's happening in terms of improved sanitation. We actually do not find much change, particularly in rural areas, where only 21% of children have access to sanitation facilities even today. So there is definitely something that we need to think about. Look at what's happening with the scheduled castes. Only a quarter of the scheduled castes and less than a quarter of the scheduled tribe children have access to sanitation. And we also see that stunting is most prevalent in those households which do not have access to sanitation facilities. So yes, we can at least see an association there. And therefore, I think we need to really, I think the Prime Minister has already announced the Swachh, the toilet, the Swachh Bharat. What is it called?
Swachh Bharat,
Swachh Bharat, Swachh. Okay. So we're going to look at toilets facilities, but I do not know whether just building toilets is going to be enough. We've got to bring behavior change, because we have seen in many states where toilets are even built, there is no water facilities, but even if there are water facilities, people don't want to use them because we've really not invested in behavior change and bringing about the the understanding and the idea of why use a toilet and what is the advantage of using a toilet. So I think a lot more investments, and we have very more civil society friends here, and I hope going forward we will be able to work with the government to be able to do that. In terms of the good news is increased enrollments, and I think Joe already talked about that across all 4 countries, not so much in Ethiopia, which is now, I hope, going to catch up. Today, in 2013, you're looking at almost, a total of 97% children enrolled in schools at 12, as compared to 89% of those children in 2006. So definitely, what it proves is, ours being a pro-poor sample, the poorest children are accessing schools today. And that is the good news. And you can look at it across SCs, STs, BCs, OCs. Almost everywhere you've got, 97, 98% access. And that, I think, is what I think the whole emphasis of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan has been, building schools at every 1 kilometer habitation, and that's why probably children are in schools. But remember, many of our schools, children do happen to be in private low-fee charging school, which Jo mentioned in her talk. In this round, from 44%, the number of the children who were 8 years old, 44% almost were in private low-fee charging schools. Just remember, it's a pro-poor sample. This round, it's come down slightly to about 41%. Yeah, and we don't know causality for it, of course, but we are probably looking at the age stage, because now at 12 they're in upper primary schools, and we are assuming that might be one of the reasons. As they're moving towards secondary schools, some of them might have moved back. But just to note, we have many papers, and if you're interested, please do go onto our website, of children changing schools as much as 3 or 4 times, from trajectories from government to private, private back to government, children moving from low-fee charging schools which charge slightly more tuition fee to lesser, fees paying schools. So there are huge, issues here. It's not so simple, and private schools are definitely not homogeneous. So even amongst the low-fee charging schools, we have a huge variety. And yes, in terms of the 2 cohorts, 32% of 12-year-olds in 2006 were in private schools, and like I said, this has increased to 41%. So cross-cohort increase, but between round and 3 and 4, for the younger cohort, private school enrollment has decreased slightly. Gaps in terms of private school enrollment are actually widening. So boys, 46% of the boys were in private schools now, and 34% of the girls. In terms of the poorest deciles, 15% are actually in private schools, and 72% of our top tercile, which is actually not the richest elite, just remember, they are today in private schools. So this is really what it's leading to, a whole lot of inequity between children. Choice of schools based on where they are going. So yes, we've already mentioned this, that we've not at 12 children across urban, rural, bottom, middle terciles are in schools. But, and this is what we need to worry about, learning levels are declining. When we compare the children in 2006 with the same maths questions we asked in 2013, there is, we're looking at comparison, there has been a decline of 14 percentage points overall for 12-year-olds in 2013, and this decline is actually across both public and private schools. So it's interesting to see that you've got a 20% decline here in government schools, and you've got close to about 12 percentage points in the private sector. So what is it that is causing this decline? And I think we need to look more closely at how, yes, these are the poorest children, first generation learner who are reaching schools. We're probably now in the 2013 cohort, for example, in government schools. But is there something more we need to think about? The fact that, is there enough monitoring and mentoring of schools? Are we actually looking at the no detention policy not actually turning into a no learning policy? Is that what's happening? And is it in grade 9 that when children are tested for the first time that we're going to wake up to the fact that children haven't learned? There are no teacher appraisal systems, ma'am, in place at the moment in our country. So there is no robust system of actually appraising teachers in terms on an annual basis when we give increments. Private schools seem to be more robust, and we have many papers from the last 3 rounds where we've looked at teaching in schools through our school surveys, where we found, yes, there is more monitoring in private low-fee charging schools, but teachers seem to know more in government schools when we tested teachers. So knowledge-wise, they're better qualified, paid 3 times more. Why is it that learning levels are falling? In terms of grade progression, and I think that's a very important indicator, we look at the number of children who are actually overage for their class at age 12. Look at the boys, in fact, there's almost 23% of the boys are overage compared to 11% in 2006. And we got 23% children in private schools now overage compared to 15% in public schools. No detention policy, and yet there's overage children. And our mean age when they started school was 5.5 years. So we need to look at this more carefully. And of course, I think as we go forward, we will do more analysis to look at it. And our qualitative study is going to be starting in October. I hope we will be able to answer this question more closely as we raise some of these questions in our next qualitative round of finding out what's happening. But yes, in our few papers that Professor Uma Venom wrote, she did mention that one of the reasons we find is that every time children change schools, they are asked to repeat a grade, especially by private low-fee charging schools. They will make them repeat the grade. So that was something that came up in the last round. So when you move from one school to another, they will say, you don't know enough and repeat the grade. And this is in private schools. 19-year-olds, we find a fall in enrollment across the rounds. You can see all 4 rounds here. So from the fact at 97% of our children were enrolled. It's now down to 49% almost. So 50% of our children now are only enrolled at age 19. And you can see that the bottom tercile is just 35% as compared to 67% of the top tercile, the least poor. So you can see the inequities in terms churning out as they grow older, overage, and huge disparities between the least poor and the poorest terciles. In terms of youth trajectories, you find, look at where they are, because Joe mentioned very rightly that we need to look at what are the children doing who are enrolled. So one is enrollment, but just look at this is the total sample of children who are enrolled. Out of them, good news is that 66% have reached university level of those who are enrolled at 19. And that is, of course, a huge, I think, victory for us to see a poor sample reaching university. But, of course, you can see the disparities here because you look at in sheer numbers. Remember, there were equal numbers, and if there are many less girls enrolled than boys. So out of that, while 263 boys are today enrolled, you've got only 199 girls currently enrolled. So yes, there are disparities by gender. Also look at those who are no more enrolled at 19. That means they're now no more in school and doing other things. You're looking at those children who have no qualifications. That means we're looking at those who have not completed grade 5 here, not finished grade, maybe just done grade 1 or 2. That's 12% of those who are not enrolled. Another 13 or 14% who've just done lower primary, which is grade 5, and 27% of these children who have attained elementary education. So you have a large number of children who are no more in school, who probably have secondary and less, and very few who have actually attained higher secondary level of education. 40% of our young people from our poorest terciles were actually working full-time compared to 14% from better off households at this point in time, those who are no longer in education. And if you're looking at those who are already in full-time work, we find that most of them belong to most marginalized sections, mostly self-employed or wage-employed. And the issue is here, how is the national youth policy impacting the poorest children? That's the question that we need to look at more closely. The dropout pattern also, if you look at each round, and this is by each round, we had 10% children drop out between the ages of 8 to 12, 13% between the ages of 12 to 15, and 30% of the children who were still enrolled in round 2 to 3, dropping out between round 3 to 4. Amongst this 10%, the maximum here is 55%, more than 50% were from the bottom tercile. So just look at how the bottom tercile are dropping out. Yeah, between the ages of 8 to 12, largest number from the bottom tercile. But look at between ages 12 to 15, almost equal number of those children who dropped belong both to the bottom and the middle tercile. Yes, so I think it's very important as we formulate policies to catch them before they can drop out. And are we actually targeting the poorest children from those particular families to be able to give them the required support that they do not drop out? So because our children have turned 19 and we are able to look at what age of marriage they have actually, the girls got married, we are looking at almost 36% girls who were married out of our cohort, and very few boys. There were just 9 boys who were actually married. So 174 girls married, 9 boys married at the age of 19. The mean age of the girls who got married was 16.6 years, which is much below the admissible age of marriage. This is Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So obviously the Child Prevention Marriage Act is really not on the ground working. We do not know reasons, and as we go forward and do our qualitative research, we will get more data regarding that, and we will come back to you. But no surprises that 46% of girls from the poorest deciles were already married at 19. And if you look at the highest education level attained by these older cohort girls, you've got 47% who had elementary education, 15% who had not completed their primary education, a small number, 13% who had actually got higher secondary education, and 24% who had got secondary education. So we have some very few, 12 girls actually, which comprises 6.7% of our cohort, who are currently married and studying. And we were discussing with Professor Venom that we should actually do a study with these girls to find out what is supporting them in continuing to study even post-marriage. And that would be very useful to actually look at. So, yes, I think lots of policy-related, ideas coming out of our initial cut of the data. But one thing is clear, that we definitely need a multi-pronged, targeted approach to tackle malnutrition particularly. Because as we go forward, I guess if we are focusing on the new Right to Food Act, we need to look at the PDS distribution, we need to look at water sanitation, we need to look at behavior change, especially focused on the special focus districts. But I think more importantly, moving beyond the special focus districts, the poorest decile across the country, no matter where they may be, because even in urban areas you have very, very poor, socially deprived people. We need to look at equity with quality and therefore focus on learning, moving beyond access, and I think that's what I think now we are looking at within the education domain. But how do we make sure that there are accountability mechanisms built into the system so that we are able to actually support the poorest deciles who are now entering school and helping them and supporting them into learning and learning the right skills? Because Professor Boyden alluded to that it's not about just being enrolled, it's about getting the requisite skills to be able to look at life opportunities which will meet the aspirations that these young people and their families have. They're making huge, you look at the sacrifices families are making, and some of our qualitative case studies capture some of those sacrifices, loan burdens that they are taking on, selling off their land to educate their children because they have those aspirations from education. So we can't let them down. And I guess as the national policy, youth policy, is being rolled out, I guess we have to make sure that we support children in actually meeting their potential and gaining the skills required to secure them a future that they deserve. Thank you very much.